Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. The news just came out about the finalists for the Pro Football Hall of Fame class of 2026. There could be 5 players and 3 others that are contributors or coaches or seniors, and I'll go through those, especially with respect to hobby impact. So thanks, sponsors: Topps, Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. We live in a superstar world. Big name players get the big bucks with cards as well as in their contracts. People that own the teams are celebrities in their own right, and many others involved in the industry. Pro football is huge business. College football is huge business. Sports is huge business. Hall of Fames are very popular, and many times the value of sports cards is highly correlated with Hall of Fame status. And not just if you're in the Hall of Fame, but if you're a first ballot Hall of Famer. Now, when they're doing these Hall of Fames in every sport, they need to have some kind of a positional proportionality, regional proportionality. In other words, they've got to have not the same number of pitchers as shortstops, but they can't ignore a position that's meaningful. There can be less kickers in the Pro Football Hall of Fame than quarterbacks, certainly, but there need to be centers and guards and tackles and safeties and every other position that's increasingly getting respect in the sports card world. The quarterback Hall of Fame, it can't be that. And it can't be the Dallas Cowboys or New England Patriots or Pittsburgh Steelers. There's great franchises. But when you go to the Hall of Fame, you expect to see a cross-section of eras, the decades. That's why I think it's really good when I've been asked to comment on the baseball card Hall of Fame and the basketball card Hall of Fame and the football card Hall of Fame. I think it's important the decades are represented. They don't have to be fully proportional required, but it needs to not just be about the latest and greatest. It needs to be cross-section, telling the story of the whole sport. Let me start out with contributors. First of all, that's interesting. Probably the least impact on cards and the values of cards. The semifinalists were Bud Adams. Not sure there are many cards there. Owner of the Oilers. Roone Arledge. I think he's going to get in someday, but not cards because he was a television executive, but visionary. Ralph Hay, very old-timer. I think no cards. Bucko Kilroy, got some cards, but probably not going to move the needle there. Robert Kraft, who is actually the finalist of the 9 semifinalists. He is the one that has been put forward to have a chance to get in. He's one of 5. There's 1 contributor, 1 coach, and 3 seniors. They can be up to 3 of them would need to get 80% of the vote. Again, not many cards for Robert Kraft. It's mainly players that are impacted with this. Art Rooney Jr., Clark Shaughnessy, Seymour Seawolf, the Elias Sports Bureau official statistician of the NFL and also a member of SABR. So he was all the sports, built a huge business, and a man after my own heart of being a statistician and realizing, frankly, it's not the statisticians that lie. It's the statisticians that are given data that has been manipulated that give conclusions and summaries of data if the data is not good. And that's why when I was doing the price guides for decades, for so many years, to be able to recognize manipulated data was a big part of what we did. The late topic now is shill bidding, any kind of activity that is manipulative. Shill bidding is a problem because it manipulates the truth of what things really are selling for without the manipulative effects. And manipulation in football is insidious, but only in the sense they keep increasing the number of games. They actually are increasing the number of plays as well by the rule changes and the clocks, the rules for kickoffs. Overtime rules have changed, all these things. But we get 17 games to break records made in a 14-game season, and when you had a lot less teams and all that. So, again, don't blame Seymour Seawolf. In fact, I think he should get in. And Buddy Young is the last one who actually would be impacted if he gets in. Sympathetic in many respects, first African-American on several levels, and was a good player. At any rate, I am not voting for Robert Kraft if I have a vote, because that means if I'm going to vote for Robert Kraft, does that mean I have to vote for Jerry Jones? Both those guys were very influential and successful owners. Jerry, not so much lately, although we'll see. The second group of coaches, and they have 9 of those. I have a little bit of a problem with the geographical representation, although Bill Belichick now is in North Carolina, at least for a while here. But he is the finalist out of the 9 semifinalists. He does have cards. He's got Pro Set. They're very highly produced, so they may not get extremely valuable, but there'd be an impact if Bill Belichick gets in the Hall of Fame. He's already one of the all-time great coaches. So I'll give that to him. And I think he's a strong candidate for getting in. If it were me, I'd make him wait because he's not demonstrating coaching excellence in the college game. So he either bit off more than he chewed, or frankly, there's just different attributes and skills and abilities are required to coach at a different level. If you were a Hall of Fame coach, could you coach middle schoolers or Little League? Supposedly you could, but maybe not. Tom Coughlin was a semifinalist. Again, not a player, but a good coaching record, an intense guy. Mike Holmgren got a Super Bowl. Chuck Knox, there's some cards there, but they're mainly coach cards. Buddy Parker, I remember him from when I used to live in Pittsburgh. Dan Reeves, I think Dan Reeves is the sleeper. If he does get in, it will impact because he was a good player and he was a Cowboy for many of his good years and had several different coaching stints. So I think there's some possibility, and that would move the card deal. Marty Schottenheimer, I think there's already some built-in extra demand for Marty. I don't know that he's ever going to get in the Hall of Fame, but if Brian, his son, does well, that's already increased some interest in Marty Schottenheimer, and he does have cards, and he was a good player. George Seifert from the 49ers, to me, he's in Bill Walsh's shadow, so I would not be voting for him. Mike Shanahan, he might be in Kyle Shanahan's shadow in the final analysis. I'm eventually going to vote for Bill Belichick, and I actually think he's going to get in. And then on the seniors, they picked 3 out of the choices. They had 9. The finalists moving forward were Kenny Anderson, the longtime quarterback of the Bengals, Roger Craig, running back for the 49ers, and L.C. Greenwood, defensive lineman for the Steelers. Bengals not necessarily a popular franchise. I think that's part of what might hold back Kenny Anderson, because I think he was a really good quarterback. If you're not a perennial winner, he's got a league MVP. I note that. But I think there's so many quarterbacks there. I think the standard for quarterback should be a little higher. Again, great quarterback. Roger Craig, I think I vote for him. L.C. Greenwood, just because I was a Cowboy fan and lived in Dallas. I'm not against the Steelers, even though they were the 2 leading teams there in the 70s, certainly, when L.C. Greenwood was prime. But there's so many Steeler defensive players that are already in the Hall of Fame. I raised the bar. Once the guy you're playing next to is Mean Joe Green, you may get less attention that way. Okay, so of those 3, Ken Anderson, Roger Craig, L.C. Green, I put Roger Craig first for sure. And I might vote for Ken Anderson. The only reason I wouldn't is because I don't want too many quarterbacks in the Hall of Fame. Henry Ellard did not make the grade, and I don't see him as a Hall of Famer. L.C. Greenwood, when you tout that he's a 4-time Super Bowl winner, that's a member. I want to know how many times he was All-Pro, not just playing in the Pro Bowl. Your peers, were you one of the top players? And he wasn't even the best defensive lineman on his team, so I have a little bit of a problem. Joe Jacoby, I think he was, again, part of a larger group of hogs, but he should get some consideration. But he doesn't have that many cards. If you're a defensive player, you're not going to have very many cards anyway. Eddie Metter, I remember watching him play. He was good, but he's just in that limbo stage. That was before football really broke out, I think. Stanley Morgan, really good player, maybe. Steve Tasker, I think he has a good chance because they were no-name players for special teams until Steve Tasker came along. And because he had so many highlight hits on returns, they just thought, who is this guy? And he became a valuable special teams player. Otis Taylor, I remember being very worried about him because it seemed like he was always having long touchdown receptions for the Chiefs back in the day. But there's already a lot of Chiefs in the Hall of Fame as well. Not that he wasn't one of their better players. So I've got Roger Craig and Bill Belichick going in this time, and maybe Ken Anderson. So that's of the potential for 3 in that order. And then we've got the 26 semifinalists from the modern era players. To cut to the chase, I think the conventional wisdom is that Drew Brees is a lock. I think he's eventually a lock and probably a lock this time. Larry Fitzgerald, one of the top receivers of all time. So those 2 guys are my locks. Frank Gore has longevity and was a really good running back. But when I think of the top running backs, I don't think of him. I think of him being around for 20 years, it seemed like, that he was just good, but to me, not great. Drew Brees could get a bump and do a little bit better. And Larry Fitzgerald, both those guys might take a little bit of a bump, but they're already known to be great players. Okay, going quickly through the others, I'm not going to vote for Willie Anderson, tackle for the Bengals mainly. There's too many other Willie Andersons out there in this sport and other sports. I just don't think I'm ever going to vote for him. You need to be called out when you're watching ESPN or any kind of a sports program. You need to hear their name being called out for a pancake block or something, and I just don't remember it that much. Drew Brees, longevity as well as being outstanding. I think he's for sure, and he's my number one choice. Lomas Brown, I do think he will eventually get in, but not this time. He does have cards, but not that many. Jari Evans, I'm not so sure about him. Again, another offensive lineman. Larry Fitzgerald, he's in. Frank Gore, I think people think he's going to get in, but like I said, I'm not sold. Rodney Harrison, I think he's going to get in, and he may even get in this time. Torrey Holt, I think he's eventually going to get in, but I don't know that it'll be this time. Luke Kuechly, I think his cards would be affected because he already has a following, and he was a fun player to watch, a big hitter, linebacker. Eli Manning, I think they'll make him wait. He could get a little bit of a bump there. Robert Mathis, sack master, defensive lineman, even when you get in the Hall of Fame. And Lawrence Taylor sells. Beyond that, I'm not sure. Phillip Rivers, I don't know that I'm even going to have Phillip Rivers in the Hall of Fame. He's got some good stats for longevity, and he wasn't a bad quarterback, but in his draft class, he was the fourth best guy, I think. Steve Smith Sr., not to be confused with Steve Smith, the Trojan from USC. I think he could get in, but not this time. Terrell Suggs, I would vote for him, but not this time. Fred Taylor, not sure. He's good, but not great to me. Earl Thomas had a good run there, but not so sure about him. Adam Vinatieri, I do think he will eventually make it. I wouldn't vote for him this time. Hines Ward, I would vote for him. He played the position the way it was supposed to be played, and he would get a bump on his cards. Reggie Wayne, I've already seen some interest. In fact, I already see interest in Hines Ward and Reggie Wayne in the cards that I sell because I think they are anticipating that they will eventually get in, and I believe they'll eventually get in. Richmond Webb, just not glamour. He's got some cards, but longtime Dolphins offensive tackle. Not sure he's going to get in, but he's deserving at that position. But I just don't think people are going to be excited about voting. They have to vote for him over somebody else. That's the tricky part. You only get a certain number of people you can vote for. Vince Wilfork, I think he's going to get in. Again, not this time, but eventually. I think he was a fun, big, huge guy that was fun to watch. Kevin Williams, another defensive tackle. I've got Vince Wilfork way over Kevin Williams. In fact, there's too many Kevin Williams. Shouldn't be a thing when you're hearing the name. In fact, the most famous guys are known by one name. When you say LeBron, you don't say LeBron who. Or you say Michael even. You don't say Michael who. You know they're talking about. Steve Wisniewski, the guard, I don't know that I'm going to have him in, but I did note that he was a semifinalist in 2014, and then he is coming back up in 25-26. I just don't know about that. I don't get very excited about the interior linemen anyway. They have to stand out. They have to be named. Next is Jason Witten. These are alphabetical. I'm not as high on him as you might think I would be for being a Cowboy fan because I think he stayed too long. He's a nice guy. He was a great player at his peak. Then he hung around, and actually he eventually will get in, and his cards will get a slight bump, I think, but not a whole lot because he's just not a game changer. He was a solid, steady, really good player. Darren Woodson, I think he could get in. I'd have him in before Jason Witten based on being a safety and a hard hitter, and his name was called. You would notice him out on the field. And then finally, Marshall Yanda, the lineman for the Ravens. The Ravens have a great legacy, but I just not sure. When you're talking about linemen, it needs to be who comes to your mind when you think who are the top linemen of the last 20 years and how do they stack up with the guys before. At any rate, that's the Pro Football Hall of Fame ballot, at least the semifinalists for the players. We'll be finding out as we go, but the game is in the sports card world is you want to buy the day before it's announced, not the day after, because there's always a little flurry of activity, and you shouldn't be surprised. Another thing I'll do a podcast on is the prediction markets. You can essentially bet on who's going to get in, but you're betting, in a sense, when you're buying cards, that it's going to go up because the guy got in. And that's a fun way to do it. To me, it's not betting, but it's a betting of sorts. And as I've said, I'm always in favor of weeding out any kind of manipulation, inside information. I don't have any inside information. I'm just telling you my opinion. Anyway, thanks everybody, and enjoy the Halls of Fame as you go to them and watching the games. It's just fun to watch the games as they're occurring, and even watching highlights from past games, and form your own loyalties based on the outstanding play that you see from these great athletes. Thanks everybody. See you in a couple days.